The savagery of it, the brutality. Of all the cases we've covered on this channel, this one might be the most shocking and horrific. This is the Walker family, or was the Walker family, and this is their story. Osprey, Florida. The small population of just over 6,000 is located in Sarasota County. It's known for its natural beauty, but the notorious murders of the Walker family remain a stain in this little piece of sunny paradise. This crime has slowly faded away from the headlines. Most tourists just passing through are unaware of the 4 members of the Walker family and the horror that took place within the walls of their small cottage 65 years ago. Just 6 days before Christmas, a soulless killer or killers targeted the family and made certain no witness would be left behind. The murders of Cliff and Christine in and of itself are horrific, but what was done to their children can only be described as barbaric. Many theories have floated down through the decades. No one went unscathed by the accusatory eyes of Osprey. Neighbors, friends, relatives, and notable killers on the run would face the scrutiny of authorities. Now that I have your attention, let's begin to chip away at this 65-year-old cold case. Let's try to understand how the killing of this small family has gone unsolved for decades. Three years prior to their murders, 25-year-old Cliff and 24-year-old Christine moved to Osprey from Arcadia. The couple had been married for 5 years and lived in a modest cottage with their children, 3-year-old Jimmy and 2-year-old Debbie. The home, surrounded by pasture land and forest, sat on an isolated piece of land at the southern tip of the Palmer Cattle Ranch. Cliff was employed there as a ranch hand. The nearest neighbor was a half-mile away. Cliff adored his wife and children. He was hard-working, well-liked, and was oftentimes involved in local events. His death and those of his family came as a crushing blow to the community. But as more details of the crime became known, rumors swirled and the smear of Christine's reputation began. Christine, who also went by the nickname Tilly, was pretty, vivacious, and flirtatious. Men always noticed Christine when she came to town. Jealous women claimed that she dressed too provocatively, and many believed that it was too dangerous to wear dresses as low-cut as Christine often did, the result of which might be unwanted male attention. Even authorities documented reports of at least 6 men that were known to make unwanted advances towards Christine after they had been drinking. It was noted that they propositioned her, patted her on the rear, and tried to kiss her. The day before the murders, Christine told her mother and mother-in-law that Cliff had been in a fight and almost got killed. Unfortunately, before Christine could elaborate on the incident, Cliff appeared and the conversation came to a halt. The slanderous comments about Christine's character and alluding to the possibility that she may have played a part in causing the crime infuriated family and friends. Relatives stated that Christine was kind, giving, loved her husband, and was a devoted mother. On the last day of their lives, Cliff, Christine, and the kids headed to a used car lot in Sarasota to test drive a few cars. No purchase was made until Cliff had a chance to think things over. After picking up a few groceries and stopping at another store to pick up cigarettes and snacks for the kids, the family made one last stop at a co-worker's home. Don McLeod was a friend and fellow ranch hand. Cliff stopped to pick up some cattle feed and made plans to go hunting with McLeod the next day, while Christine and the kids visited with Mrs. McLeod. At around 4 p.m., Christine decided it was time to go home. According to authorities, the children wanted to ride in their daddy's open Jeep that had been loaded with the feed. So Christine left alone in the family car, followed by Cliff and the children just minutes later. This was the last time the Walker family was seen alive. On December 20th, just after dawn, Don McLeod drove over to the Walker home to go hunting, as he and Cliff had planned. McLeod immediately noticed that the house was dark and that the feed in Cliff's Jeep had not been unloaded, which seemed odd to him. He also noticed that Christine's car wasn't parked where it usually was. McLeod knocked on both the front and back doors of the cottage, but no one answered. He began to get a bad feeling and used a penknife to unlatch the lock on the back door. Upon entering, he found Christine, Cliff, and Jimmy on the floor. Blood encircled each of their bodies. McLeod quickly drove to the nearest payphone to alert the Sarasota police of what he had found at the Walker home. When authorities arrived just minutes later, not one detail was missed as they began their search of the Walker home. A small, fresh-cut Christmas tree stood on the porch. Obviously, the family was getting ready to decorate it. Gifts were found wrapped and hidden away in anticipation of Christmas morning. As officials moved through the home, the carnage was enough to stop them in their tracks. Some had to look away in order to gather their composure. Whoever committed these atrocities surely wasn't human. The sheriff's department didn't have a crime scene photographer, so a few reporters were allowed in to take pictures of the bodies. Evidence was studied and collected as Sheriff Ross Boyer slowly pieced together what he thought occurred once the Walkers left the McLeods and arrived home. At the start, Boyer believed that the killer was acquainted with the Walkers and may have even followed Christine home. The home was enclosed by 2 fences. The first held the Walkers' 2 bulls, and the second held 3 hunting dogs. Boyer stated that a stranger most likely would not have made it past those fences. Another possibility was that the killer was already at the Walker home when Christine arrived. This would explain why her car wasn't parked in its usual place. Seeing a familiar face, Christine may have invited the killer inside, as she did not see him posing a threat. Boyer went on to point out that Christine hung up her purse and put the groceries away. This gave credence to the fact that she felt comfortable with the killer. Cliff and the children didn't arrive home until 20 minutes after Christine. It was during this time that the killer probably made advances towards Christine and was rebuffed. The killer became enraged, and a struggle ensued. At one point, Christine tried to escape and made her way out to the front porch. She took off one of her high-heeled shoes to use as a weapon against her attacker. The blood-smeared shoe was found on the porch. Once the killer got her back under control, he forced her into Jimmy's bedroom and threw her onto his bed. Christine's face had bruising where she had been punched. The killer had a .22 caliber gun that most likely went off during the struggle and hit Christine in the head, leaving a superficial wound. A second shot penetrated the top of her skull, killing her instantly. It's unknown if she was alive or dead when she was sexually assaulted. The killer used a blanket to cover Jimmy's blood-soaked pillow and then used another to wipe up the blood from Christine's legs before dragging her into an area between the living room and a small sitting room. After reenacting how Cliff and Jimmy were killed, it was agreed that the killer was a very good marksman. They believed he was startled by the arrival of Cliff and the children and quickly concealed himself behind a bedroom door. Once Cliff stepped inside the front door, The killer stepped out from behind the bedroom door, aimed the gun, and fired a bullet under Cliff's right eye. It was such a quick, clean kill that even as Cliff hit the floor, his cowboy hat still remained on his head when he was found. The children became the next victims, and Boyer's only explanation for killing them was that they would be able to identify the killer. Again, this fit Boyer's theory that the perpetrator of this crime was known to the family. After shooting Cliff, the killer turned his gun on 3-year-old Jimmy. He fired a bullet into Jimmy's head, but the bullet didn't kill him. Jimmy was crawling over to Cliff, seeking the protection from his father, as the killer shot him 2 more times in the head. The 3-year-old was found laying at his father's side. It's unknown where 2-year-old Debbie was located when she was shot. She too could have been crawling over to her mother when she was shot in the back of the head. Like Jimmy, Debbie didn't die instantly. At this point, the killer may have been out of bullets and made a quick decision of how to permanently end her life. A sock was found stuffed into the drain of the bathtub, and it was filled with 4 inches of water. The killer placed the small child face down into the water and held her tiny head under until she stopped moving. When authorities found Debbie, her clothes were still wet and most of the water had drained out of the bathtub. A 4-inch blood ring remained as proof as to how much water had been used to drown the child. Putting the horrific scene aside, authorities turned their attention to the collection of crucial evidence. A bloody palm print was found on one of the bathtub faucet handles, and a cellophane strip from a cool cigarette wrapper was also found. 22 caliber casings were collected from different locations in the home. Christine's high-heeled shoe containing the blood smears of the killer was bagged up, and a bloody print from a man's boot was photographed in one of the bedrooms. As the investigation moved forward, authorities discovered some odd items missing from the Walker home. The Walker's marriage certificate, Cliff's pocket knife, and Christine's high school majorette uniform that she kept in her cedar chest were now all missing and presumed to have been taken by the killer. Sheriff Boyer now felt he had a pretty good grasp on who he was looking for. The killer was most likely a local. He was a decent marksman, and he would have wounds on him from being struck with Christine's shoe. The sheriff began an aggressive search. Bloodhounds were used to search the countryside. Cliff's co-workers were interviewed and given lie detector tests. Analysts completed over 2,920 fingerprint comparisons, and nearly 75 residents handed over their guns so authorities could conduct ballistics tests. A short time after the murders, neighbors found bloody clothing belonging to the Walkers in a shed near the home. It's believed that the killer used the clothes to clean himself up and then hid them in the shed. Authorities were unable to determine how long the clothes had been there. 7 men that had been fishing in a nearby creek the day of the murders were questioned, and 3 men seen drinking on the road to the Walker home were also interrogated. Even a signed confession from a serial killer, Emmett Monroe Spencer, didn't move Boyer any closer to making an arrest. So let's now take a look at the suspects list that Boyer was able to narrow down shortly after the murders. First up is the aforementioned serial killer Emmett Monroe Spencer. It was Boyer's belief that Emmett was a pathological liar who cleverly constructed his confession from newspaper articles that he read on the Walker murders. Spencer was never seriously considered in this crime. Wilbur Tooker, the Walker's neighbor that lived about a mile down the road. Those who knew the 65-year-old retired railroad worker said that he was obsessed with Christine. He had made advances towards Christine on several occasions until Cliff became so angry that he told Tooker to never set foot on their property again. According to authorities, Tucker didn't have an alibi from 4 to 5 p.m. the day of the murders. They did learn that he had dinner with a friend from 5 to 7 p.m. and then played his violin at a concert that began at 7:45 p.m. No one at the concert remembers Tucker acting strangely, nor did he have any noticeable marks from a scuffle. Tucker died in 1963, and in recent years his descendants provided swabs of their DNA so they could be cross-matched with the samples found on Christine's underwear. It was confirmed that Tucker could not be discounted as the contributor to the DNA mixture found on Christine. Curtis McCall, a hot-tempered, violent young man of 21 years. It was rumored that he was having an affair with Christine. Was this just town gossip or the truth? No one knows for sure. The young man admitted that he had owned a .22 caliber gun in the past, but said he sold it. McCall submitted to 3 lie detector tests that all came back inconclusive. When asked on one of the tests if he was withholding information about the Walker murders, the polygraph showed a high indication of deception. With no physical evidence to tie McCall to the murders, law enforcement stopped their pursuit of him. There is no current information about what became of McCall. It's as if he just disappeared. Albert Walker, Cliff Walker's cousin. Relatives told authorities that Albert drank a lot and was known to have a violent temper. It was also divulged that Albert was secretly in love with Christine and had even stayed with the couple for a short period of time. On the day of the funeral, he cried uncontrollably until he fainted. His relatives went on to state that Albert refused to ever talk about the murders. Albert was given 2 lie detector tests. The last one was performed sometime in the 80s. Both tests cleared him of the crimes. Albert said Cliff was like a brother to him, and he could have never hurt him or his family. The final suspects are 2 killers that were on the run when the Walkers were murdered. They had killed 4 members of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas in November of '59. The MO was eerily the same. No witnesses were left behind after the 2 broke into the Clutter home. All the victims were shot in the head, including 2 teenage kids. This is Perry Smith and Richard Hickok. While on the run, the 2 killers made their way to Florida shortly before the Walkers were murdered. The deadly pair stayed at a motel just 4 hours from Osprey and checked out the day of the murders. Smith and Hickok were seen that same day making a purchase at a Sarasota store just a few miles from the Walker home. A witness at the store remembered seeing scratch marks on one man's face. On December 30th, 1959, the killers were arrested in Las Vegas, Nevada, and a report of items found in their car included a pocket knife similar to Cliff's, a toddler's shirt, a lady's pink jacket that could have matched Christine's dress. Both the shirt and pink jacket were found stuffed under the seat of their car. An army gas can and burlap bags that could have come from Cliff's Jeep. Sadly, none of these items of evidence can currently be located. The FBI also confirmed that they got rid of Smith and Hickok's palm prints. Interestingly enough, a report indicates that Smith and Hickok sold 2 dolls to a minister in Louisiana for gas money after they left Florida. No one knows for sure if the dolls could have been Christmas gifts for little Debbie Walker that the killers may have taken from the Walker home. Before Smith and Hickok were executed in 1965, they denied any involvement in the Walker murders, and both passed lie detector tests. Investigators have continued to work on the Walker cold case over the decades, and this is the most up-to-date information that we have access to. In 1994, a bartender in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, contacted the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, claiming that one of her customers boasted of killing the Walker family. The man was in his 60s, and the tip was never verified. In December of 2012, the remains of Smith and Hickok were exhumed and DNA was extracted. In August of 2013, the Sarasota Sheriff's Office announced that due to the degradation or contamination over the decades, the DNA could not prove nor disprove their involvement in the murders. The boot print found in the Walker home had a similar pattern to the one found in the Clutter home. Smith wore engineer boots that featured a circular pattern that could match the print taken from the Walker home. Sarasota shut down an investigator's efforts to transfer the boots from Kansas for examination. They stated that they wanted a DNA connection to the crime first. In 2013, Cliff Walker's niece reported that she had her uncle's marriage certificate that had been stolen from the Walker home. The niece claimed that a relative had given it to her. The relative was later proven innocent of the murders after DNA testing failed to link them to the crime. In 2019, cuttings from Christine's underwear, along with a stain containing a single sperm cell, were being tested again. Testing generated pieces of DNA from one male and one female, but the results were too tangled to isolate any individuals. So the search for the killer of the Walker family goes on. The problem with older cold cases such as this one is the lack of urgency. Homicides are prioritized into 3 categories: current, wrongfully convicted, and older cold cases. Most of the time, suspects in these older cases are likely to be deceased, so they no longer pose a threat to society. These cases get shelved as investigators take care of more urgent cases. But as we've stated so many times on this channel, the families of these victims carry the loss of their loved one through their entire life. To surviving members of the Walker family, this crime seems as if it just happened yesterday. Whether the perpetrator is alive or deceased, we can never stop searching for the justice that Cliff, Christine, Jimmy, and Debbie deserve. If you have any information concerning the Walker family murders, please contact the Sarasota County Sheriff's Department at 941-861-5800. Are you obsessed with true crime content? Subscribe now and join our growing community as we analyze and discuss the details of some truly baffling cold cases. Browse our growing library of cold case investigations and immerse yourself in the mysteries that keep us up at night. Subscribe and join the EOJ community today. All it takes is a click.